a weekly conversation with people making a difference in the Tampa Bay region. I'm Janet.
And I'm Tom.
And operating the board today is the great human preserve, John Dunn. Answering our phones is Joe Remo. If you want to join our conversation, call us at 813-239-9663, and he'll get you through to us. You can also email us at dj@wmnf.org or text us at 813-433-0885. Keep in mind, Wavemakers is available wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for WMNF Wavemakers on your favorite podcast platform, or you can search for the WMNF archives.
Today we're going to talk about one of the great natural wonders of the world, and with a young native wavemaker who is working to protect it. The Florida Everglades is vast, covering 1.5 million acres. It includes Everglades National Park and Big Cypress Preserve. Big Cypress is America's first national preserve. It was established 50 years ago last month, thanks in part to the efforts of the Miccosukee Tribe, who have called it home for hundreds of years. Joining us today to discuss the Great Cypress and the role it plays in Miccosukee history and culture is the youngest member of the Miccosukee Tribal Council, William Osceola. Welcome to Wavemakers, William.
Hello, good morning. Chidamo.
Or should we call you Popeye? I understand you go by Popeye.
Yeah, I definitely prefer to go by Popeye. A lot of Williams out here, a great name, but Popeye is close to my childhood Indian name, and it's the nickname my grandmother Evelyn gave me.
Popeye it is.
Tell us more about that, though. Your native, what was it closer to?
So my childhood Indian name, we have ceremonies. So when boys become men, we get a new name, and then, that part of me is gone. So I'm not really supposed to say it, but Popeye was pretty close to what it sounded like. And, out here, we have clans. So like if we're the same clan, you're my grandma no matter what. If you're of that generation, you're not like a great aunt or whatever. So sometimes grandmothers get territorial. So it's like my grandma was like, I gave him that nickname. It's my grandson.
Well, Tom and I spent a couple days last week in and around the Everglades, especially around Big Cypress, and we were struck by how intertwined the land is with the Miccosukees. And we're going to talk about efforts underway to protect the preserve, including pushing back on a proposal to designate it as a wilderness. But first, Billy, tell us, how did the Miccosukees wind up living in the wilds of the Everglades? Can you take us back to how they ended up there?
Sure. Actually, I haven't heard Billy since I lived in Connecticut for a little bit, so I'll come hard. But
okay, Popeye.
No, just like our ancestors, we used to live more up north. I have a little connection, as I mentioned. I lived in Connecticut. We didn't live that far north, but we used to be more located in the Florida Panhandle area. And during the colonization period, when the European forces came over here, they started using the tribes against each other. There are some differences between nations, tribal nations in the past, just like any other people. So they saw those differences and kind of drove a wedge between them and pushed us further south as they started, establishing their presence here, trying to get land for their people. And when America became established, that just increased even further as they spread across this country, and we got pushed even further and further south during the Seminole Wars. We've always had familiarity with this land as part of our traditional ranging territory, but we didn't live down here on a more permanent basis until after the wars.
But so you were undefeated. The Miccosukees are proud of the fact that you were not defeated in these wars, and you were not put on the Trail of Tears. You found refuge in the Everglades, right?
Yeah. So it was actually my ancestor Abiyaka. He had told the tribal members, I think there was around 100 or 200 of us left, hey, follow me into the Everglades. We're going to go further into the swamp. It's going to protect and save us. So we kind of look at him almost like a Moses figure in that sense, where he did lead us to safety. And, strong leadership is important in all areas of time, I guess. You can't make it unless you got strong leadership. So his leadership was built off of our culture. So that's why people were willing to kind of follow him and listen to him.
And how many members of the tribe are there today?
So currently there are 643 members enrolled in the Miccosukee government. There are independents out there. I have family who are independent. So they're not enrolled in any tribe, but they are Miccosukee by blood.
And what does that mean about the difference between being enrolled in a tribe and being independent?
So being enrolled in the tribe just means you're on our government roll, you have a number, and you're part of our system. If you are of Miccosukee heritage and you're part of this community, that's an option for you. But some people feel strongly that the government we have is kind of like we're giving up a part of our indigenous identity to be a part of this because it's not something that was here when we were thriving 200 years ago, let's say. So some folks want to kind of maintain that sense of, let's just say, purity. And I know for some people, they are like holding on to our medicine, things that have been around for centuries. So they kind of feel like, well, we have to keep this medicine pure and we can't be a part of that world. It has to be more part of the traditional world.
And among those independent Miccosukees, are they living in the Everglades or are they living elsewhere?
It's a mixture. I mean, you have plenty of independents living in the camps at Big Cypress, and that's one of the reasons why we're fighting so strongly to protect that, because those more traditional-minded folks are our lifeline through the tradition as it was 100, 200, 300 years ago. So we don't want to lose access to that, just our whole way of life. Some of them do live on the reservation. We do take care of them. They're able to go to our Miccosukee Indian School. But yeah, it's by choice. We have options.
So the life on the reservation, there's people living on the reservation, but that there are also people who live, when you drive down US 41, you see the Indian villages along the way. What's the difference between those Indian villages that we see and the Miccosukee reservation and headquarters?
Sure. So the Miccosukee Reservation, where most of the tribal members live on, that's the more modern area. So that was facilitated by the DIA, the American government, in the mid-1900s. During the federal recognition process, after we got that recognition, they provided us some resources to get our community set up in a more modern sense. Those villages you see along the highway, those were actually started by families closer to the 1900s after Highway 41 was built. They set up those villages to help make money from tourists, so that way they could make their living, because they realized, well, the modern world is encroaching on our traditional land, so we can't live this way forever. We're going to have to figure out how to negotiate this new. And those tourist villages are authentic, but they were designed to kind of interact with the modern world a little bit more.
But now they seem to be more private. When you drive by there are signs that say this is private.
Yeah, and I think that's a sign of changing times. As the tribal government got established, government did do its work to help those camps, make sure we protect them. So they didn't have to always fully rely on their own way to make it forward. They had the community and the government to kind of back them up. But I would still say those folks are pretty independent-minded. They don't assume that the tribal government is going to be there to bail them out, but I think they kind of view us as like a safety net, break-in case of emergency type thing.
Tell us a little bit about life on the reservation. You live on the reservation, correct?
Well, I grew up here, but it's really hard to build homes in the swamp. You got to make land first. So I live 5 minutes from the resort now, but I grew up here. But I'm out here every day, and it's a lot different out here than living in Miami. Even just like the air quality, people don't realize it's very pure out here. And you think about oxygen. Oxygen's going to your heart, to your lungs, and to your brains. So if it's got all those fumes, chemicals, everything in there, that's got to have an impact on you. So being out here, it gives me peace of mind, clarity of mind, and I think that comes from the environment itself. It's just different out here. It feels slower paced, and sometimes it reminds you that all that noise out there is just that. It's just noise. How important is it really? It's just when you're out here in nature, just hanging out with your friends at the cooking chickie, just talking over the fire. That's what feels like what's real,
It struck me that how quiet it is out in the Everglades.
Yeah, it's peace of mind. I mean, to me, it feels free out here. I think I used to say this to my students, like when you're out in the wild, and when I said that, they knew I meant Miami, because to us, Miami's wild, predictable, was dangerous. Here, it's the environment. We know this environment. We're fine out here. We're safe out here. And
the reservation has pretty modern houses, but it appeared that each one had a chickee hut somewhere on the property. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, tell us about the tradition of the chickee huts and why that has continued.
So in our culture, the fire kind of represents your life. So you kind of have to always keep that chickee fire burning. Like even during the daytime, it doesn't have to be like raging, but you should have like the embers still going. So we wanted to make sure we prioritize that traditional element with our people as we modernize. So typically you will see the chicken or the cooking chickee behind the homes. And quite honestly, like the older generation, they're more comfortable out there, cooking out there, and that's their environment. That's where they thrive. So We don't want to make ourselves too reliant on convenience. Sometimes it's okay to just start the fire by hand, go get the wood, maybe chop it first, and then manage it, cook everything, stand out there in the elements, be a part of nature, not so closed off. Putting up walls around you has such a huge impact on your psychology. So sometimes it's better just to be out in the open, cooking over the fire.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Wave Makers on WMNF, and our guest today is William Osceola, also known as Popeye, who is a member of the Miccosukee Tribe, and he's talking to us about the work that his community is doing in the Everglades. If you want to join a conversation, you can call us at 813-239-9663, or you can send us an email to dj@wmnf.org if you have a question for Popeye Osceola. So the reservation, you talked about how it's very self-sufficient. When the reservation, and you have your own school, and there's a police force, correct?
Yep.
And one of the things that you're working on now is becoming more energy independent, thanks to a grant that you got from the EPA. Tell us a little bit about that.
So we were recently awarded a $15 million grant from the EPA for greenhouse gas reductions, which we're going to use towards putting up more electric vehicle charging stations and solar power. Solar power is a big objective of mine during my time in office, just because tribes are always working towards protecting their sovereignty, safeguarding it, building it up. And to my mind, if you can't account for your own energy source or food source or water source, you're not as sovereign as you would like to be. So we need to be energy independent in order to be truly independent. And, Florida Power and Light didn't set us up with the best grid when the tribe was established, this reservation, which is true across the country. Most rural communities, not even just indigenous, but just out there in the woods, they don't get the best quality of, infrastructure. So we're trying to put it more on our hands instead of waiting and relying on those outside to do it, because we've just seen it's not a priority for them. Plus, we have a lot of people here with health issues and whatnot, and we just want to make sure that, if they're on dialysis or something, that the machines aren't turning off in the middle of a storm.
So we were talking about your presence in the Everglades and on US 41, and there's multiple places where there's a Miccosukee presence there. You've got the Miccosukee Village, there's the casino and resort, there's the reservation, there's also all the little Indian villages, smaller Indian villages along the way.
Airboat.
The airboat rides, all that. But you're also kind of branching out and having a larger presence in other parts of the state with opening up an office in Tallahassee. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Well, we have to make sure that we connect with legislatures and the communities to get them to understand who we are and our history, because we don't want to get boxed in with other people who may be misrepresenting themselves or misrepresenting us. Unfortunately, it does happen from time to time. And I just want to make it clear out there to anybody listening, there are two Florida tribes. It's Miccosukee and Seminole. And I have to make that clear because unfortunately we have folks up north who are trying to get into Florida, and they're trying to say that, maybe Miccosukee is not as sovereign as they say they are. But we know our history, we know who we are, and that's why it's important that we get out there and tell our story so nobody else is telling it for us. Even people with the best intentions don't have the full picture. I mean, when I was doing research as a child into tribal history, just seeing what the non-native perspective was, I would read multiple books about the Seminole Wars, and they would all say the Seminoles signed a treaty. But even with that, that's taking such a broad approach. If you look at the actual history, maybe a couple of Seminole leaders signed and a bunch didn't, but they treated those people as one. They took away their political autonomy and just lumped them to simplify and make it easier for them to be approached as just one people, get rid of all of them.
So, are there other things that you're doing to get out there? Tell us more about what you're doing. You have a festival coming up in December. That's something you've done for a long time. There's been the Miccosukee
Heritage Festival.
Right?
Yeah, so the Miccosukee Indian Arts and Crafts Festival has been going on this is going to be its 50th anniversary this year. So if anybody wants to come check it out, it's been 50 years strong. And that was started as a way to reach out to the non-native world and show them what we're doing here. And, if they like the stuff we're doing, come check it out. It has value. Hey, if you want to take a piece of it, you can even buy it from some of our vendors. I know during the first festivals, the late Lee Tiger and his brother, Tiger Durban, they had actually performed there. So that was kind of something that they helped get going. And I know it started, they had done like community performances. And then I guess people were just like, hey, we should do this for the non-natives. And that's kind of where this idea came from.
There was a period of time, it struck me, that where your tribe was a little more inward facing, and now it seems that you're taking a more public facing approach. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say so. To my perspective, all societies go through rubber banding where they make progress and then they shoot back towards regression a bit. And that's kind of what happened with our tribe, where we did a lot of outreach in the 1950s and 60s as we became a tribe that was gaining federal recognition. And unfortunately, there's different groups out here that were trying to get their message out there, and they all were connecting with the media. So I think the people back then felt like we shared too much. So they shrunk inward way too much, and we kind of got very restrictive on what we would talk about or even outreach. To me, as a former teacher, I taught at the School of Language and Culture at the Miccosukee Indian School. I also taught digital arts. To me, ignorance is always the problem, and you have to get the information out there in front of people if you don't want them to be ignorant about something. If they're ignorant about something, they're more likely to fear it or reject it. So I don't want people to fear or reject us. And I don't want to leave it in the hands of other people to tell our story, because it's not going to be the full picture.
Well, the other folks who are trying to come into Florida and get recognition, is that being driven by their desire to get into gambling?
Yeah, unfortunately, gaming is a primary mechanism for tribes to have an economic resource. In fact, IGRA, the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, that was kind of the government admitting we're never going to fulfill our treaty obligations. We're never going to follow the law of the land, which we established, which are the treaties. So we need to give some mechanism for these tribes to support their people. And that's why tribes are able to do gaming. But most tribes don't have access to gaming just because of where they are in the country. Some tribes up in Alabama, Georgia, I guess they realize we're hitting our limit here. We need to expand. So they're trying to get into Florida because, long time ago in our past, we have a shared history. But at certain points, those diverge. I relate it to like America. America was a British colony at one point, right? But then you guys fought for independence, and now you're your own nation. You would never listen to King Charles if he came over and said, you guys are still our people. So that's kind of how we view the situation.
And so the Miccosukee Tribe has its a rather large casino. You mentioned the resort. So the resort includes a casino. Can you tell us when was that established, and is that benefiting tribal members?
Sure. So our gaming was started in 1990, I believe, might be 1991. I get a few dates mixed up because I have to keep track of a lot of dates.
Close enough.
Yeah. So that was started back in the early 90s, and our resort side was built up in 1999. And pretty much all the work we do, like environmental or even infrastructure internal, it's supported by the economics of that building. Again, we oversee 1.1 million acres of land, and there's 643 of us. So a lot of that goes towards advocating for the Everglades through Western Everglades restoration or combating things like the wilderness designation of Big Cypress.
So let's talk about that. But first, let's talk about the tribe's role in creating the preserve to begin with. As I understand, a spark was a proposal to build a giant airport in the preserve. Can you walk us through what the tribe's role was in getting Congress to establish the Big Cypress as the nation's first preserve?
So my exact knowledge on that history is a little dicey. I'm more focused on the Everglades, but I know that the tribe has always advocated for Big Cypress just because of our presence there. And, we have long ties to that land, so we've kind of seen how the whole ecosystem works. So we always try to do what we can to advocate for to preserve it, basically. And I think with that airport, we figured, well, if there's going to be somewhat of it's an airport and it's for the specific government function, that means the government's probably going to do a better job of trying to protect that piece of land and the area around it and safeguard it. So I think that was part of the thought process back then. But, governments change, objectives change, people's perspectives change. So what was established back in the day, maybe around the 70s or so, it's not the same situation we're dealing with now.
Right, and so the Biden administration was proposing to designate the preserve a wilderness, and it may seem counterintuitive to the tribe's goal of protecting the preserve. The tribe was opposed to this wilderness designation, and it appears that your lobbying was effective because now the administration has backed off of that idea. Can you tell us why the tribe was opposed to this?
Sure. So wilderness, as defined in this country historically, has basically been a mechanism to erase indigenous history on the piece of land that they're trying to designate as wilderness. Because wilderness, as defined here, basically means that this land has been untouched, uncultivated, there's no human presence here. So that's what wilderness is defined by the federal government. So if you're defining Big Cypress as wilderness, you're basically erasing our history, our hundreds of years of connection to that land, our access to that land. So for us, that was a complete non-starter. And it's just a reminder of, like, even people with the best intentions, they don't always have the full story.
So
Governments try to help tribes, but sometimes it has the reverse effect.
So how would making it a wilderness have, what would that do? How would that hinder the Miccosukee people?
So that would have added another layer of bureaucracy to just have access to the land that we always have had access to. So, people living in camps, if they wanted to, some of them still have like traditional chickie homes, like the roofs. They wanted to rethatch that and go get, supplies in the woods. If there's that wilderness designation, well, then that means we'd have to probably permit or lobby some bureaucrat just for my grandmother to be able to fix her house. We have our ceremonies out in Corn Dance where there's different things that go into that ceremony, but there's like collecting of, plants, some resources, animals. How would that impact our access to that land right around us? Even if we're going to chop wood, if it's a wilderness designation, federally protected land, we have to go negotiate. How long would that take? We have our ceremonies every year. The government moves slower than annual speed,
And did you get allies in the environmental community to join you in the opposition, or were you at loggerheads with those groups?
It's always different. You'd be surprised. Some groups are with us on some issues and some are against us on other areas. So
it reminds me of...
We did have a lot of support between the local officials, state, federal, and local governments. So we've been trying to take a broad approach, win hearts and mind in the community, but also work with those who have the levers of power in their hands.
Now, what would you say are your major concerns environmentally regarding the preserve and the Everglades? And I think of both of the... I think we're talking about the preserve and we're talking about the Everglades, but it's one giant ecosystem, right?
Yeah. It's all connected. That's why historically my people would move from Big Cypress to Everglades with the wet and dry season. It's the hydrology is connected. It's all connected. It's only us that separates it in our minds.
Yeah.
The animals is just something they just go back and forth with, right?
They don't notice the lines on the map.
No.
And so what environmental issues are you confronting now? I know you want want more energy independence, less reliance on fossil fuels, which could lead to a cleaner environment.
Yes.
What are other things that are going on that our listeners might be interested in?
So I'm not sure if your listeners are familiar with the term "water is life." That's a phrase that gained a lot of prominence years ago during the Standing Rock protest up north in the Midwest area, but it is true fundamentally. Water is life. So water quality and water quantity, those are always huge objectives and goals for us to keep in mind, trying to improve those, get those back to a more natural standard, because we're surrounded by it. I just think about what impact, again, I mentioned the wet and dry season. My people would move with the land based off of where the water is. So it's so key to us that this water has to be improved, the quality. It's crazy out there. You find alligators with like shriveled up legs or tails, and that's just because of whatever chemicals are going through there. I know my elders, they could just go and take a swim or just grab water from like a paraphyte in a plant in there and just squeeze it and drink the water from it. We don't have that ability now just because of the level of pollution out there. And then the flooding, our tree islands, the hammocks, those historically are where our people lived, and they're being flooded out to the point where they're degrading and disappearing. So we've actually had to spend money to put land back on those islands. And those islands are home to all sorts of animals. When up north, when they put too much water flowing down south from Lake Okeechobee, that floods these islands, and that's exacerbated by climate change. And that's when you start seeing like turtles all on the highway. And because there's more turtles on the highway because they're flooded out the islands, you see more turtles getting hit. You see deer getting hoof rot because they have no dry land to stand on. So it's got all of these impacts. So we're always focused on water. water quality and water quantity.
And you've had the Army Corps of Engineers. They have decades of things that they have done that have worsened the quality of the water and have degraded the environment in the Everglades. It seems like they're trying to turn the clock back a little bit. Do you think they're succeeding in that? Is that working?
It's going to help mitigate some of the disasters we're seeing now, and it's better late than never. I will say that the Army Corps has been better about communicating with the tribe and actually getting input. You know, you'd be surprised, for years, federal or state government agencies, sometimes they would send a letter to the tribe, and we wouldn't respond or say that we're in favor of what they're doing. But just because they sent that letter, they would be able to say, oh, we consulted with the tribes, and then they would just move forward. But that's not real consultation, communication, which they're actually trying to do now. So that's been good to see. But
what about the elevating of US 41? Is that something that I think DOT is doing? Is that?
Yeah, so that's to help with the water flow. You know, the areas that they're putting those up, it's to try to get water going through more, because basically the highway has operated as a large dam for about 100 years now.
Right.
It's also because, again, I mentioned sea level rise, and they're acknowledging that. You know, for us, it's a bit crazy because we see the highway, it's elevated 11, 12 feet. And they're like, this is what's going to keep us safe. And your homes are at 9 feet.
Right.
So we can see the highway is physically taller than our homes. So it's interesting.
Was that a project you supported as an organization, or did you weigh in on it at all? Or
we didn't really have an official stance. I think it's just more generally we kind of look at it as oh yeah, you're finally trying to fix that mistake you did 100 years ago.
Right.
If you had just listened to us, you wouldn't have made that mistake. But oh well.
You're listening to Wavemakers on WMNF with Janet and Tom, and our guest today is Popeye Osceola, who is the youngest member of the Miccosukee Tribal Council. We're going to talk to him a little bit about his personal story and how he came to this position right after this quick break.
Support for Wavemakers comes from listeners like you and the Tampa Bay Times. The Pulitzer Prize-winning newspaper is available around the Tampa Bay area and online at tampabay.com. Thanks to the Tampa Bay Times for their support.
Jazz is alive at WMNF. Tune in Sunday evenings at 8 for Colors of Jazz at our new time, featuring new releases from new artists, old favorites, international jazz from Europe, Asia, and Canada, covering everything from big band swing to bop to fusion. We play it all, plus specials celebrating the music of giants like Ellington, Miles Davis, Pat Metheny, Quincy Jones, Chick Corea, even Frank Zappa. We play the music you'll hear no place else on the radio. Check out our interviews with local jazz musicians. Jazz is what America sounds like, and it's yours to listen to come Sunday evening. If you can't catch us live, play it back from the archives.
And we're back with William Osceola, and we're talking about the Miccosukee people who live in Florida's Everglades. Thanks for being with us, William. So when we were talking yesterday, getting ready for the show, we talked a little bit about popular culture and representation of indigenous people in popular culture, and there seems to be more of it and offering a little bit more of an awakening for people like me about indigenous history in the United States. So tell me about that. Is that something that you're seeing and that you're seeing in a positive light or negative? How are you seeing about those portrayals? I
see it as a positive. And I think it's reflective of the fact that there are more indigenous voices in the production elements, and not just like I mentioned with the government stuff. They're not just going after the fact and just fulfilling a quota or whatever. They're actually talking to these communities and getting their perspective, or letting them be the voices, the main voices to get these across, whether it's as writers, directors, producers. I actually did an event with Mound House a week or two ago when we showed a documentary called Real Engine. And that's about how natives have been showed in movies throughout the years. And you see the different cycles of what they go through. You know, you got the noble savage or just the savage Indian, things like that. So I think we're entering this phase of well, here's the actual reality, because the people living it are the ones telling it now. So to me, that's a positive because it's more accurate. It's a more accurate reflection. And, you know, I know people out there, the ones who are always represented try to downplay the importance of representation, but it is important just because you can see when they don't feel as represented, how much you're kicking and screaming out there right now. I think you see that a lot in the national community. People feeling like they're being erased, but just because somebody else is stepping on the stage doesn't mean you're getting pushed off. So
shows like Reservation Dogs, for example, might help, non-natives to appreciate the culture that you are holding on to.
Yeah, and actually, Reservation Dogs, just to show that natives aren't a monolith, I've heard people in the community, I got a cousin, he's not a big fan of this show, but I am. And we talk about it, and sometimes I think some people don't like the full reality being shown, maybe, but
what doesn't he like about it? What is his objection? I'm curious.
I don't know if you guys are familiar with the band The Sex Pistols, but there's this line, a cheap holiday in other people's misery. So I think that's the feeling he gets. Like, some people are just tourists to like the reality of what tribes have to go through, and they're not actually going to help the tribes. But you have to make people aware of an issue first before they can actually try to address it. So I'm more in favor of the show.
Gotcha.
Yeah, some people don't want any negative portrayals of their people.
Yeah.
But, life is full of positives and negatives. So I guess you're getting closer to reality. I don't know.
It shows that, things are more complex than you would imagine, and that maybe some of these people who seem so different than you are going through the same trials and tribulations you are.
Well, and also just from a show like Yellowstone and its precursors, where they have portrayed the indigenous people and the schools that were for the kids that were trying to deprogram them, basically. That is something that has been uncovered in recent years that we haven't really talked about, and is now becoming more of a part of American history.
Yeah, I know President Biden had actually acknowledged the children that were killed during the boarding school period. Fortunately, my tribe was not impacted by that as much as other tribes because we were still pretty isolated out here in the swamp. I know a couple of elders who did go to boarding school, but it's a little bit different. But other tribal communities, you still see the impact of, just imagine if the government came to your house and you were doing nothing wrong. They just didn't like the way you live, so they took your kid, and you don't have access to your child anymore. You don't get to make any decisions. You don't even know if your child's okay or if they're still alive. And they send them to a facility where they, if you spoke your language that you've known all your life, they would beat you. If you didn't cut your hair, dress like them, they would hurt you. All these kids went through all sorts of abuse. And I'm a firm believer that no school should have a graveyard, but all these boarding schools have graveyards. So I think it kind of shows you the harsh reality.
And it's so much recent history. It's not like it would happen a really long time ago.
In fact, they don't operate like they did originally, but some of these boarding schools are still open. So the history is still there.
Well, but today, the Miccosukee Tribe does have its own place and its own government and its own schools. So can you tell us about how the tribe is organized? You were actually elected to the board. This is not something that you inherited, right? There was an election, 3 years ago. What made you decide to run for that?
There was a few different factors. I did have community members reach out to me and say, hey, you seem like it would be good for this job. Have you thought about it? And that was because of my years of working at the school, and they saw that, clearly I was invested in the community and its future. Quite honestly, to my mind, things have been stagnant out here for about 2 decades as far as infrastructure and whatnot. So I saw a lot of need and a lot of potential for progress. And I did ask my grandmother, Evelyn, whether she thought I should run. And when she said, yeah, I think you'd be good for it, at that point I flipped the coin, and then the coin came up heads, so I ran.
And so now you're secretary of the board.
Yep. So there are 5 positions. There's the chairman, assistant chairman, secretary, treasurer, and lawmaker. And we have our elections every 4 years, the year after America's elections. But ours are a lot more sane and manageable. We don't drag it out for like 2 years. It's not a $1 billion industry behind it. It's just a couple months. Hey, come get some food and hear what I have to say. If you like me, like what I have to say, vote for me.
With only 640 folks, it must be very personal campaigning that you're doing.
Yeah. We all kind of basically know each other out here. So, that goes a lot into determining who you feel should be in office. Well, I know this person. Do I feel that they're capable, or do they have the same values I do? Some people prioritize things differently. Some folks are more focused on, are they more immersed in the traditional ways. And some look at it more like, well, do they know how to actually answer an email and write back? So,
what are your top priorities for the time that you're in office?
Education. Education's always been my priority for myself personally and for the community. It's the only way to uplift any community out of whatever hole they're stuck in, is to educate them, to give them the best tools and knowledge possible. And, we're a democratic society, so a democracy is only as strong as its individuals. So you want to have the best educated populace you can to get the best decisions made.
Amen.
Quite honestly, I think that's, I was raised Miccosukee, and then I'm an American second in my mind. So I've always paid attention to systems around me. And I think we're trying to make sure we don't repeat the mistakes of what America's gone through. And I think there's a lot of, the fact that people demonize public education when that's the broadest base of education, to me, that's like a whole warped perspective I can't understand. Like, I've dealt with kids coming from charter schools or private schools, and it's a mess out there. Even in Florida, they try to make it seem better than it is. But, I've had a high school student, 12th grade, transferring from like a nice private school where people spend a lot of money. And it's like, how do you have like 2 years of Bible study but no social studies, and you need to graduate?
Yeah.
And it's crazy out there. But the fact that people attack public education, those are the ones I would say you'd always have to be skeptical of, because they're trying to undercut the broadest community.
And at the Miccosukee School, are you teaching the kids about your history and your place in this country?
Yeah, I would teach them as much as I could about our history and American history, because a lot of people don't know either. And if you've ever gone to, if you talk to a professor of history at any colleges, they'll tell you the first thing they have to do with students coming to their program is have them unlearn everything they learned and, their education up to that point, because history until college, you get a sanitized version. It's more mythology. So I try to give them the reality, because a lot of people out there don't have that full picture. I always wondered in primary school, why am I learning about Paul Bunyan instead of the people that actually lived here before?
And so the school is located right on the reservation, right?
Yeah, it's right in the heart of the Everglades. Actually, I'm pretty proud of that school. With the tribe school, the clinic, and the police, we were actually the first tribal nation in this country to assume operations of those services and not rely on the federal government or state government.
When was that?
I think that was back around 1971 or 72 in that area.
And what else? What other services? Are the services that your government, the tribal government, is providing, is that funded through property taxes the way, a local government in America is funded, or are you relying on the proceeds from the casino? How does that work?
Yeah, it's revenue based off of land value and things like that, from the casino as well. That's why I always mention the casino, because people generally assume casinos, people who do that, they want money. But it's no, we need that money to fund our government. As I mentioned before, we're protecting 1.1 million acres of land, and that is not cheap. And, if you want to talk to people in power to get them to do the right thing, unfortunately, there's a price limit on what dinner plates they have available. You can't meet that limit. You don't get to have dinner. They don't get to hear your perspective.
Well, tell us a little bit about your journey, though, how you got here. You, how old are you?
So I'm 35.
35?
So I'm halfway to middle age.
Halfway to middle age. But you're the youngest member of the Miccosukee Tribal Council. And tell me, you said you lived on the reservation when you were younger, but tell us where you grew up and where you went to college.
Sure. So I lived down here on the reservation until I was about 4 or 5, and then I moved to Connecticut for about 7 years. So I got a good taste of traditional life in the modern world, especially up in New England. They love to self-mythologize up there, especially about the Pilgrims and the 13 colonies and all that stuff. So I got a really good sense of America's identity as seen from the place where it started.
Why did you guys move to Boston? Or to Connecticut,
we
I'm
lived
sorry.
in Connecticut.
Connecticut.
So my mother fell in love with a man from Connecticut. He was living down here working with some of our people, and some of the crews. And then eventually she just kind of wanted to move somewhere else. The res at that time was not the most welcoming environment, especially if you're a native in love with a non-native. So, we love who we love. She loved this man. We moved up north where his family was. Unfortunately, he did pass away in a drunk driving accident. We stayed up there for a few more years, and eventually my mom just felt like, well, I have to give back to family. I need their help. So I think it was around 2002, we moved back down here and then went to middle school, graduated from Miccosukee Indian School. And
So
Did
what was it like coming back? Because that was you left when you're 5 and then you come back as basically an adolescent and your eyes have been opened to a different way. Were you totally into being with your people or what was that adjustment like?
It was a mixed bag because obviously I love being back with my people, but I could see where there's like gaps in how we operate and how things operate out there. I mean, education was not as prioritized back in the 90s and early 2000s, and that shifted, which is great. But even when I first moved back out here, I was kind of treated a little differently just because since I grew up in Connecticut, I had gotten used to how non-natives live. So the fact that I came back down here, I would wear like shirts with buttons and they'd be buttoned up. I might have my shirt tucked in. Mm-hmm. Sometimes my friends would be like, why are you dressed like that? You look like a white boy. Huh. Or sometimes they say like apple or like you're red but white inside. So and that got sanded off over time as I reintegrated. But it was interesting to like see how I'm them, but they're treating me differently just because of the trappings from the outside world.
And did you grow up speaking the Miccosukee language? And then this is showing my ignorance. I don't even know about the Miccosukee language.
Yeah, so I was actually pretty good at our language, which we call Ilapungi to the general public. Until I moved to Connecticut, my mom kind of stopped speaking it up there, so I lost a lot of my fluency. And when I came back down here, we're all human, so I had that psychology of like, I know I'm inadequate in this area, and my contemporaries are farther ahead. I don't like that, so I'm going to act like I don't want it instead. So I didn't pay the most attention when they tried to teach me as a teenager. So that was the biggest regret as a teenager. But as an adult, I have made more efforts to pick it back up. So I have a pretty good vocabulary. I can't speak fluently like some of my cousins, but I can understand. And I know when I taught at the school, I did relay my experience to the kids about don't be like me. Don't realize what you lost until it's too late. You have the chance now to pick it up, so do it.
So when did you start skateboarding? Was that in Connecticut or Florida?
Oh, in Florida. As much as we maintain our traditional ways and our culture, we do have strong influences from outside. So like when Jackass came out, that hit us like a bomb in our community because we have like skate park, cameras, so much freedom out here, maybe too much freedom at times. So yeah, around 2001, 2002, a lot of us, well, even a little bit before that, there were skaters out here in the 90s, but.
So you're making extreme ramps, extreme skate ramps in the middle of the Everglades?
Yeah, I mean, this is a government facility out here. So sometimes there's like supplies, random wooden boards or rails. So we just go grab those and be like, well, I guess we're going to make a ramp here.
That's cool.
I mean, we just built a new community health facility. And then I was looking at the ledges and I was like, man, if I was 15, the tribe would have had to pay money because we would have messed up this ledge skating on it.
And so you led the effort to build a modern, safe skating facility, right?
Yeah, internally. Externally, we had some younger people in the community who wanted a new park, so they had started fundraising. And when I got into office, I made sure to actually be responsive to the community's needs. So I made sure internally that we helped get that project done across the finish line, prioritized it.
And it's done. I saw a video that was made of you skating and talking about the importance of that to young people. And one of the points you make in that video is that it's not just a skate park, it's in the Everglades, and you can get to the top and look out at this unbelievable landscape.
Oh, yeah, it's beautiful. It's the only skate park in the world that's like that. And, I always mention the positives from when I was skating with my friends where, we grew up with a lot of trauma from history and modern times, and we don't always feel comfortable expressing affection or positive reinforcement. But when we were skating, that was the most positive experience. Some of us would be standing on top of the ramp and we might be afraid to drop down. So everybody else would be around and be like, hey, we're going to count you down. All right. When we get to 3, you're going to go. You got this. All right. We got you. 1, 2, 3, go. Everybody would just be like supporting. So I wanted to make sure we had that space available.
So you went to, you got your degree in computer animation. Where did you go to school? And tell us about pursuing that.
Yeah, so I went to school at Full Sail University in Orlando. I've always been into art, drawing, animation. And, originally when I was a child, I wanted to be a paleontologist because I saw Jurassic Park and, still one of the greatest movies ever. But culturally, we have certain taboos, so I couldn't be going out there and digging up dead things. That's just against the culture. So I shifted and realized, well, those dinosaurs I liked, they were made on a computer. Somebody had to animate those. So my mind shifted more towards that area. And my degree is actually in computer animation. So
do you do art? Do you still do art?
Yeah. Actually, on the camera, your listeners can't see it, but on the camera, you can see behind, I actually have some art up from some of the stuff I did. I have a Photoshop poster of our chairman for Terminator 2. That's when we showed that movie to the community. So, yeah, I'm always doing art. I mean, I was just working on some stuff yesterday. I don't have it with me, but
and then
it's been my lifeline. So.
But you also were a teacher, you said. So how did you end up doing that?
So after I graduated, I came back to the community. The school I went to was an accelerated program. So we did 4 years in 2. So I was ahead of schedule. So my original plan was, well, I'm going to take a year off, just relax, go on trips. And I made it about 6 months before I started losing my mind. I was like, I got to do something. I need a schedule. So I started coming to the community and I started volunteering at parent meetings to fundraise. It's actually a community member, late Marilyn Huggins. I was walking by the school and she's like, oh, we're having this meeting, come by. And I was like, I'm not a parent. And she's like, well, you're still community. You went to the school, so you can still help. So I went. One of my cousins there was running our pre-K program and they needed Miccosukee teachers. So she saw me and asked if I wanted to work there. So I said, okay. And that's when I started working at the school and went from pre-K to Miccosukee Language Arts. And, basically I just saw, hey, there's a need here and I'm available to help step up. So might as well.
We got a caller. We've got Mike in Sarasota who's on the line. So let's take Mike. You are on the line. What's on your mind?
Well, thank you very much for taking my call. Maybe a year or maybe 2 years back, I was driving down south, and I saw the Miccosukee Tribe headquarters. And excuse me if I don't have this exactly right, but I think it said Miccosukee Tribe of Indians or Miccosukee Indian Tribe on there. Mm-hmm. And just, I know in recent years there have been some people who've said that, that we shouldn't use that word Indian, and instead we should use the word Native American. And I was just curious, has there been any discussion of that amongst the Miccosukees? Have they ever thought about changing their name, or how do they feel about that whole issue?
That's a great question, and there's actually differences within the community. For example, myself, I can understand historically where that name came from because in the 50s, it was the Indian termination period. That's what the government was trying to do, is terminate the idea of tribes. You guys are just Americans, you're not tribes. So our tribe was really hitting that point. One, we're not Seminole, we're Miccosukee. We are a tribe. We are Indians, not Americans, and we are of Florida. So we're trying to really hit those points that we're the people of this land and we're who we say we are. And in the 50s, that was really progressive. But things change over time, and we just haven't changed with those times. I would much rather prefer a name like the Miccosukee Indigenous Nation, but, it's not my battle to fight. Even those who were around when the tribe was established, because it was their families involved, they kind of feel a little bit more personal connection to that name, Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida. Because it's like, well, that's what my grandfather, my uncle, my dad established, so we want to keep that. Again, I'm not a big favor because it's just, none of those words are words that we ever used until non-natives came here, so I'm not to it, but it does affect how we're perceived by those people who use those words.
Using the word Indian is just a badge of white ignorance. That's
even
really what that is.
Tribe, the word tribe, when it comes up in media, is always a negative, right? They're getting stuck in tribal politics. Congress is getting stuck in tribalism. So,
yeah,
I'm always conscious of that. So,
well, we mentioned as you drive along Alligator Alley or US 41, there are occasional signs you'll see it declares Indian Village. So they still have those signs there. It doesn't say Miccosukee Village.
No, and actually, if you look at a lot of government policy through the years, they use Indian in there. So I feel like we're kind of trapped in the sense that we have to use that word too because, bureaucracy goes by what's on the paper. So we went by Native or Indigenous, and you look at something like the Indian Citizenship Act, would that kind of impact how that's applied? Because we're calling ourselves Natives or Indigenous and not Indians.
Mike, thanks for the call. We've also got Jackie, another caller from Sarasota. Jackie in Sarasota, you are on the line. What's on your mind?
Oh, good morning. I love your show, and I just want you to know you've made my day today.
Oh, good.
I was born in South Dakota in actually Sioux territory, but I just wanted to say that it is so good to hear a voice of reason and how different our country would be if the early Europeans had honored and respected the point of view and the lives of the Native Americans. And what a blessing! Thank you so much for having Popeye on today.
Thank you so much for calling. I
Thank you,
really
Jackie.
appreciate that.
All righty, bye.
Popeye, I'm curious, the folks who live on the reservation, are they working on the reservation too, or are they out in somewhere else in South Florida? What's the working
depends.
situation?
I think the majority of the tribal members that do work tend to work on the reservation, but we do have a few people who live off the reservation, so they tend to work outside of here. But generally, they tend to work more for the tribe because I think they have that sense of, well, I want to help the tribe. I'm going to help anybody.
Yes, and that way they don't have to drive to the wilds of Miami.
Yeah, less dangerous here.
You were talking to us about teaching. We were talking about that before we took the calls, and the schools there. How many kids are in the school? It seems like it would be small. You've got 640 some members.
So I think the school has about 160 students at this moment, and it's a K through 12 school, and there's also a pre-K and daycare facility.
Okay. And are the tribe numbers growing, or are they contracting? What's that looking like? What's the future hold for you?
I think around 2000, our number was closer to around like 450, somewhere around there. Now we're closer to 650. So it's grown. And I expect it to not be like a big population boom, but to steadily grow. I'm relying on it to be steady and slow, so that way we have time to build up infrastructure to match it.
And do tribal members get a payment from the casino proceeds, or does that go strictly to the government to support the services?
Part of it does go to the community, and then part of it is allocated for infrastructure and saving for rainy days and whatnot. But I've been pretty big on trying to make sure that people don't rely too much on government to do stuff for them. What did JFK say? Like, ask not what your government can do for you, ask what you can do for it.
Your country,
I kind of gravitate towards that mentality.
Well, you certainly live that way. And I just lost my train of thought what I was going to ask you about.
But I did want to follow up, though, on the question we had earlier about the embassy in Tallahassee. I thought it was interesting that it's on the same street with all the lobbying firms.
Yep. I mean, we did that by design. You got to get your presence out there, and those are the ones who have the direct connections to the ones holding the political levers in this country, and particularly the state.
And you have good relationships with the legislature. I mean, the state government is now run by Republicans. I don't get the impression you all are particularly partisan. No, we have to stay neutral because, well, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, the reference to natives in there, it refers to us as merciless savages. So it's been pretty clear that this system around us is not for us. Yeah.
So even though personally some of us might lean left or right as a tribe, we just got to dance with who's available, not the perfect partner in our head. So, I mean, Biden administration, Trump administration, both have done positives and negatives for the tribe. So this is really about who you talk to, who knows you.
Are you guys trying to, this is what I was going to ask you, are you trying to get people more interested in the tribe, like young people? Are you seeing young people reticent to participate as fully as you are, or is that not happening?
No, I see a lot of younger people willing to step up and step in. Even within our community, we started an embassy fellowship program, and that's geared towards more recent graduates to train them on the government and how to interact with non-natives, educate, send them out there to represent us. And a lot of younger people out there have seemed to be reaching out to the tribe. I think, I always find kids to be more reasonable than adults. Adults think they know everything, so they're not always willing to learn, but kids are still learning. So I still see that out there. Kids are willing to learn and listen.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us today. We appreciate it very much.
Popeye Osceola, Secretary of the Miccosukee Business Council. Thanks so much for your time.
If anybody wants to come visit us, we have the Arts and Crafts Festival in December, the 26th it starts. So if you make it out there, I should be there. So
the 26th of December, right off of US 41.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being with us. Thanks you, John, for running the board. Thank you, Joe, for answering the phones. Up next is Wide Awake America with Nadine Smith. This is WMNF Tampa.